Hi, this is Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to this week's RNK Software Club's video for the week. And my apologies if it doesn't sound as good as normal, but I am traveling this week and I don't have my normal microphone with me, so bear with me. The topic for this week is going to be about lettering, specifically TrueType fonts. And I know that there's some great previous weekly videos that were done about lettering not too far long ago. Last week we looked at using the Tools drop-down menu and using the font importer. Well, this week we're going to learn about TrueType fonts, and there's two ways that you can interact with a TrueType font. And first of all, when you use your Tools to your drop-down menu for text, there's an option right here to import a TrueType font, and this will bring it in as artwork and leave it to you to create the embroidery. And so notice that as always, it's going to come up with the words my text. You can make it say anything that you want. When you choose the select button, it will allow you to browse through all of the different TrueType fonts that you've got included in your computer. And so these are not the embroidery fonts that come with the Floriani software. These are the fonts that come with Windows. And it's possible to add new ones by visiting websites. Notice that when I choose something like Arial, that I have bold or bold oblique. If I choose just plain Arial, I've got narrow and italic and regular. And so this is a one way that you can access different sort of profiles of the same font, bold or italic or whatever you choose. Now you choose the size, and of course you know that you'll be able to resize it later. I usually use the largest size and bring it down to my workspace. And what it does is it brings it in as artwork. And now it's up to us to create the stitching. And so we could, resize the lettering to any size that you specifically want it. Now I have it, it's approximately an inch tall. And when you're ready to create the embroidery, you're going to need to select each individual letter and then choose from the styles of embroidery at the bottom. You could do a standard fill and make it kind of like flat, or you could choose to auto satin and let the software generate, nice turning satin stitches for you. And as always, if you don't like the auto, digitizing results, you can use your shape tool and come in and interact with the yellow inclination lines to change the stitch angles, or the orange split lines, which tell the software how to split a design up like this. And so those become very important things when it comes down to doing letters. Now, notice that when I use the auto, that sometimes the stitch directions can be, sort of a little bit zigzaggy or back and forth, and you can smooth them out if you want to. At the end of the day, just understand that when you have a piece of artwork and you come and click on a tool like Auto Satin, that you are allowing the software to choose how the stitching goes. And sometimes we can make different choices, and so we have the ability to choose the shape tool and come in, and you could right click and choose to add new inclinations to affect the stitch directions of your designs, or right click and choose to add a split line and then draw a new sort of like dividing line so that you could change the way the stitching goes in your design. And so now I could make it so that I have sort of two sides to the letter V. And so mainly understand that when you allow the software to generate the stitches, you do still have that ability to make the edits. Now, another way that you can use the TrueType fonts is through the actual text tools. And so, for example, if I click on the text tool, and it's going to come in with whatever I used last, which was this TrueType font. So notice here in the properties box that there's a checkbox for TTF. I'm just going to uncheck that and click apply. So it's going to convert to, the Anna font. And these are, of course, the fonts that come with the software. Understand that these are embroidery fonts that have been digitized and prepared for embroidery. They have already been somebody's already evaluated, the direction of the stitches and made choices. Of course, you can edit those choices if you want to, but the point here is the embroidery fonts are quite successful. They all have a good sort of suggested size range, so if you're not sure what the suggested size range is for a font, if you mouse over top of the sort of description of the font, the image of the font at the top, it will tell you things like the recommended height, minimum, and maximum. You can also click on this little checkbox or question mark here, and that will tell you that this font has sort of like a suggested size range. Well, when you go to TrueType fonts, those size ranges won't necessarily be there for you, and so you have to kind of use your own common sense. So when you start out with something like regular text, if you check this checkbox for TTF, notice that now when I click on the drop-down menu for fonts, they changed. Now they're the ones that came with Windows. And if you stick to fonts that are like Arial or Arial Rounded or these kind of fonts and click apply, the software will automatically generate the stitches and create them into embroidery. And then, of course, as always, if you don't like the way the stitching was created, you could come in and make changes. Now, the only thing is, if you wanted to do sort of the micro changing of the stitch directions or the split lines, you will need to use, notice that in the sequence it's one piece of text, and if I want to use the shape tool, I'll need to first right click and break up that text. So when you break up text, and this is not just for TrueType font text, this is simply just if you want to edit text that was made by the software, you need to break it apart. And notice now that the words my text are individual letters, and I could select any one of those letters, and now use the shape tool to come in and decide, was there anything you did or didn't like or wanted to change about the way it was created. And I'll say that the TrueType font conversion, it is automatically generating those stitches. It works very well when you have fonts that are sort of easy for the software to find the results. Now, notice that when I first clicked on this, I actually think this is a bit of a glitch that we'll have to look at. But notice that when I just started a new text and it did the words my text, it's got them all at sort of like that 0. In fact, you can really see it here in the T. The stitching's just going straight across the top. And here it was going like up and down. So what I've noticed is that when we start a TrueType font with this checked off, that sometimes it doesn't do that sort of conversion as well as it should. And notice if I uncheck it and make this like Anna, and then I go back to the TrueType fonts and choose that same, Arial Rounded and click apply, that it now applies the auto digitizing to that font. And so notice that it's much better that way. So I think my point here is, we'll see if we can maybe address that as an issue. But in the meantime, if you're working with TrueType fonts, try not to start a new text with it already checked off. So uncheck it and start with regular text and then convert your regular text into a TrueType font text. And when you're done and you click apply, the software will auto digitize it, and it does a much better job than, I guess, when it's the sort of first doing it. So yeah, anyway, that's a little tip for you. What I will say is where it gets challenging is when you give it more and more advanced, or I guess complicated fonts. Like, so for example, if I use the tool here to bring in a font that's called, and this is one that I helped somebody with, and so I know that it kind of doesn't work as well. It's called Blackladder, and I don't know where it came from. I remember downloading it, but it was a free font on one of the different websites, and notice how jangy the text is, how it's got a lot of nooks and crannies to it. If I took that letter R and just showed it as an outline only, you can see that the wiggliness of this lines poses some, I guess, challenges for the software when it auto digitizes it. And so notice that if I click here and click on auto sort of standard fill, it's quite successful. But when I do auto satin turning fills, sometimes it's got, confused or just not great results. If I turn off 3D, you'll notice here that there's obviously some parts missing. If I go to the shape tool, I can usually figure out what's gone on, and it's the software I think got confused probably by that area where the points crisscross themselves. I could, move those points around and try to sort of straighten that out. But what's really, I think, gone wrong is there's like too many split orange lines. The software got confused, obviously. I might want to right click and tell it to delete one or more of those split lines and say, why did it need so many? I think I could see where maybe one to have. So if you don't know, the split line tells the software that this is going to be an area of the design. And so that way you can have a different stitch direction sort of on one side of the split and a different direction on the other side of the split. And so here I'm going to move them around a little bit. I think I'll get rid of this split line too and just have the one, and then maybe make these stitches kind of like turn around a little bit. So you see how I'm making choices for the software, and if I right click, it'll update the stitching. And so really that's the trick of it if you're having troubles when you're converting, letters. So let's go the other way and use the text tool. So it converts my text. Let's uncheck TrueType font and let it start with just a default kind of like font like this. Now, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I wanted to just select that text and now check off TrueType fonts and try something like that black ladder, whatever it is, Blackadder. Sorry, I don't even know how to say it properly. Anyway, I'm going to click apply. And so now it's converting my text letters into this sort of elaborate font, but it's also at a smaller size, and so you can see it's taking a little bit of time. It's obviously working hard, trying to convert it. It's done the best that it can, but it's got some failures. Clearly, the letter E is got issues that are going to need to be addressed. There's probably small issues with all the letters that I might want to address. So if you want to continue working with this font, then you're going to need to select it and right click and choose breakup text. And so this is really the truth of it. If you want to, work with these fancy TrueType fonts, you may need to take a little bit control over the automated process. And so it's now broken apart the text. We can select the T, we can select the E, and this E is, a mess. And to fix it, I'm going to need to use the shape tool and study what happened. And so once again, when you go into shape mode, you will find that there will be the blue dots that make up the points of your shape, and of course you can move them around. You'll find the yellow angle lines which make up the stitch directions of your shape, and you'll find the orange lines which make up the divisions of the shape, and so that you can have, like I said, different stitch directions. And so really I think what I need to do is work through this and say, well, let's decide where to split this design up and get rid of any weird ones that, as you can see, the elaborate shape of the text is what's led the software to some sort of poor decisions. And I don't need that split line. I can right click and choose to delete that split line. And if I don't need this one, or if I want to maybe just fix it, and notice that there's no stitching in this area, well, that's because there's no inclinations to tell it how. So notice here, I'm going to right click right now. I'll have fixed a little bit, but I haven't fixed up this mess here. So as I kind of work my way through it, I just have to decide, well, where does it need to be split? I don't think it needs to be split right there. But if I split it here and I split it here, then I can have one sort of stitching kind of coming out here, and then I can have another one that kind of turns around here. If you want to add new stitch directions, you right click and say add inclinations. Now you can click and drag to add as many of these little yellow lines as you think are needed to help the software understand where it goes. And I think what's really missing is right here, I need one of those divide lines. So I right click over top of, I usually go right over top of one of the outline points to get that menu. And then I choose add split line. And I can say, well, you need to split there, and then there and there, and that seems good. Let's right click. See, now we're getting somewhere. And you can work your way through it and say, well, why the heck did it split it there? You know, that makes no sense at all. It makes sense to me to split it there, maybe to split it here, and then I'll let the stitching kind of come down through this area and turn around. So right click once again, see your updated results. And so notice that you can absolutely take control of the results of the sort of automatic stitching and micromanage it. Notice there's no stitching in here. Well, that's because, like I said, there's no inclination to tell the software how the stitching should go in that area. And when I right click, it'll fill in those stitches. And so sometimes the stitches for the pathing, when there's a lot of split directions, will jump across, and that is another thing that I will say that we'll take a look at in with the developers to see if we can figure out when there's too many divide lines. Sometimes I notice the stitching kind of jump across the path like that, and usually you can fix it. It's probably got to do with how skinny these lines are now. And so if I went in and maybe used in my properties box something in the pull compensation to fatten it up a little bit, I will say that I almost always add pull compensation to letters, no matter their sizes. But one way or another, you can totally fuss over your letters to get them perfect. And so the great news is that as much as we have, lots of fonts that come with our Floriani software, we do have the ability to start a new text segment and then convert it into our TrueType fonts. And so, like I said, I like to start with that unchecked and then check it off and browse through, and maybe on another day I'll show you guys, how to download and install new TrueType fonts. But in general, you can Google, free TrueType fonts, and you will find websites that have lots of free ones. I'll just say about that, be careful what you're clicking on, because a lot of times those websites that have free fonts on them also have lots of ads and things that, you don't, and they're trying to, get you to click on their ad when it really, you didn't care to get, that you just want to get the font. So I'll do that another day, how to find and, install TrueType fonts. But just know that you do have the ability to work with these sort of additional fonts. And when you do, the software will generate the stitches. And if you look really closely and there's any issues with it, you may need to right click and break up the text and then select those individual letters and shapes and decide what has not quite gone right and what can I do to resolve that. And so certainly, if you find some that are tricky and you want some extra help, you're welcome to send in a support ticket and we'll see what we can do. Just looking at this one going, I think it needs some divide lines. It's got only yellow angle lines and no divide lines. And so I guess I just have to decide, well, where do I need one? Maybe I'll cap it right there. And so I'll right click and choose to add a split line and maybe split one there. You could do something like this and maybe make a column that comes really long like that. And it's really entirely up to you to how to split it. But once you draw the splits, then you need to make sure that you have inclinations that tells the software kind of how the stitching should be at that time. And so there, see how I can really change the letters. And so I hope you found this video interesting. I'm sure that there maybe are still questions that I haven't answered. And so if they are, send us a support ticket, and we'll see if we can't figure out everything you need to know. But until next week, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.